Thank you for joining the UVA Clubs program today. I'm Elizabeth Muse, Senior Director of Global Engagement in the university's Office of Engagement. I have the distinct pleasure to introduce someone today who really needs no introduction, Larry Sabato. Larry is a New York Times best-selling author, has won 4 Emmys, and is recognized as one of the nation's most respected political analysts. He appears multiple times a week on national and international TV. He is the founder and director of the University of Virginia's Center for Politics and has visiting appointments at Oxford and Cambridge universities. Professor Sabato also heads up Sabato's Crystal Ball, which has won numerous awards. He is very active on social media, and his Twitter feed, @LarrySabato, was named by Time magazine as one of the 140 best. In addition, he is the author or editor of 24 books on American politics. He has taught over 20,000 students in his 40-year career, and the University of Virginia has given him its highest honor, the Thomas Jefferson Award. Professor Sabato has been affiliated with the University of Virginia for 50 years. Before I turn the program over to Larry, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. Larry, the stage is now yours.
Elizabeth, thank you so very much. And I regret that we're Zooming rather than seeing you all in person, but we're all used to this by now. And I hope that everybody is healthy and wealthy, of course, and vaccinated. And I suspect the vast majority of you are, and I hope you're having as beautiful a day as we're having in Charlottesville. I'm here in Pavilion 4, and right there is the lawn and the rotunda, and right there is the corner and a beautiful garden out back, and it's 75 degrees and sunny and not a cloud in the sky, just the way you remember the lawn. Look, we're going to cover a lot of ground because so much is happening, but I'm going to be, for a professor at least, brief. I'm going to try and keep it to 30, 35 minutes so that we have a good 25 minutes or so for your questions. We've been overwhelmed with questions. We obviously can't take them all, but we've tried to combine as many as possible. So we'll do that, and I'll be joined by the managing editor of the Crystal Ball, Kyle Kondik, and he'll be joining me at the half hour or so. So let's have a good time. Let's rock and roll, and that pretty much describes our modern politics, doesn't it? Rocking and rolling and too much fighting, but I guess it's better than the alternative, not having a republic. You know, we just released a study this morning, and I'm going to urge you to go to our website, centerforpolitics.org, for 2 reasons. So you can sign up for the Crystal Ball if you don't get it. It comes out 2 to 3 times a week, and it's absolutely free. And we have a big new study that Kyle is going to tell you a little bit more about. And it's a study of Biden and Trump voters, 1,000 Biden voters, 1,000 Trump voters. It's taken months to do and to analyze. It's not one of these quick flash polls that are not terribly reliable. And you're going to find some shocking things in there. We all know there's great division in the United States. I just hadn't realized quite how deep the divide is. Just to cite one example that I put on Twitter a few minutes ago, 52% of the Trump voters believe that either strongly believe, strongly agree, or somewhat agree that the blue states should secede and have their own country, which of course is an impossibility, which I'm sure everybody knows, because every state has blue areas and red areas, and we're not going to have a massive resettlement program. What about Biden voters? 41% of Biden voters either somewhat or strongly want the red states to secede and form their own country. Of the Trump voters, 25% support this idea strongly. 18% of the Biden voters support this idea strongly. Now, it's not going to happen, and we're measuring attitudes, not practical possibilities. But that tells you how difficult it is now and is going to be to reunite the country and having a country that works together to a certain degree. There'll always be differences, there'll always be arguments, people will be going back and forth about everything. And that's the way it should be. But it's gone way beyond that now. And we all know that violence visited the Capitol on January 6th, which changed an awful lot and will continue to change an awful lot as we move forward. So let's start with the incumbent president, where he is. And we all know the honeymoon is over, and it's been over for at least 6 weeks or so, if not a little bit prior to that. If we can just put up that first slide. This is approximately what Biden's term has looked like, with the blue line being job approval by the voters in the United States, and the red line being, or orange line, I guess it's this is blue and orange UVA day, disapproval of job performance by Biden. And I think you can clearly see that, as usual, a president starts out relatively high, although we can all, those of us of a certain age, can remember presidents who started out at 60 to 70% positive before the long fall began. Biden is at 55. Trump, not on a single day of his presidency in the polling averages, was ever over 50% or even at 50%. So the new trend, if this continues, is for a lower approval level than Americans are used to for new presidents. And recently, and certainly it has to do with Afghanistan, but I think even more so with the comeback of COVID due to the Delta variable and other factors, you have the disapproval now outranking the approval. Now, we got to keep it in perspective. Job approval, the polling average for Biden's job approval right now is 45%. He got 51% of the vote. The 55% was artificially high, as it usually is in the beginning of a president's term. 51%, you look to what a president got in the election. Biden got 51%. That's his normal approval level, and it's what the White House should strive for at a minimum. So he's only 6 points below his score on election day. Now, they want to do something about that. They certainly have to do something in the next couple of weeks with these big bills in front of them. But they want to get that back up. But I'm setting expectations here. The ceiling probably is going to be somewhere around 51%. But the 45% isn't disastrous compared to prior presidents. Almost all of them at one time or another were in the 30s. Some went into the 20s. Now, that may happen to Biden in time, but right now he's at 45%. So things are not great for Biden. He's had a very tough 6 weeks, and it looks like he could have a tough next few weeks or months. But you keep it in perspective historically. So that's where the president is, and approval levels for president determine so many things. We live in such partisan times, such polarized times ideologically, that a presidential approval score really determines a lot of other things. Because if a person approves of the president's performance, he or she probably approves of the other members, most other members of the president's party. And if a person disapproves of the president, then probably he or she is sour on the incumbent party, on that particular party, the president's party. So we're divided like that partisanly and ideologically, and I don't see any change coming. I don't see any reason why there would be a substantial change, at least in the near future. We shall see what other factors come into play. Let's get the next slide up there. This demonstrates division in another way, polarization in another way. This is the map of the current United States Senate. And of course, red is Republican and blue is Democratic. And you see 6 states there in purple: Montana, Wisconsin, Ohio, West Virginia, Manchin, Pennsylvania, and Maine. They are the only states represented by a Democrat or Democrat independent versus a Republican. That is, one Republican, one Democrat in some combination or another. All of the other states, every one of them, has either 2 Democrats or 2 Republicans. Now, you go back to past decades, you can check it yourself. we frequently had a much larger percentage of states having representation from both parties. In fact, some states, especially small states, like to do it that way. So they had somebody in the majority caucus, no matter which party was in charge of the Senate. But you can see how much that matters anymore. And look, some of those divided states will be changing. Once Manchin goes, almost certainly West Virginia is going to be red. When Susan Collins leaves the Senate, probably Maine will end up being blue. Montana will end up being red once their current Democratic senator retires. This may be his last term, but I don't know that for sure. So in Ohio could easily do that as well after the current Democratic senator retires. The point is that polarization is affecting Americans at all levels, in their voting habits at least, and as our new study reveals that you're going to see on centerforpolitics.org/crystal ball, you're going to see it because it was released this morning. It's the first thing up there. You're going to see that this is the norm. This is the new normal in America. Good, bad, or indifferent. It's the new normal, and it's going to last for a while. Okay, this is supposed to be about the future, and the future is always hazy, you know. But we're going to look at a few maps that will help us put 2022 and 2024 in some perspective. It's more than a year until the 2022 midterm elections. No one's foolish enough to bet on every individual race at this time. Too much will change. At the very least, there will be scandals in certain races and candidates will have to drop out, and Biden's approval level will be very important to the results. Lots of other factors will come into play, but we can at least look at the format. And this map, of course, shows the Senate elections that are up, and it's 34, 35 seats, I believe, up next year. And these are our very early ratings. Now, you notice the red states, they're Republican incumbents, and they're favored right now in almost all of those states. Similarly, with the blue states, the deeply blue, the senators who are Democrats are deeply favored, heavily favored. The light blue states, the Democrats are, favored, but not heavily so. And I should have mentioned light red states. That's probably true for the Republicans coming up. Not heavily favored, but favored. The open seat states, we already put Wisconsin and North Carolina at least leaning Republican, where they are right now. That could easily change, but we have to find out who the Democrats nominate in Wisconsin, who the Democrats nominate in North Carolina, and similarly, what happens in some of the competitive states with Democratic incumbents. Nevada, Arizona. Arizona is very much in the news as well. This is Mark Kelly coming up, not Kirsten Sinema. And New Hampshire, the incumbent, if she faces Chris Sununu, the governor, that will be a toss-up race, or who knows, maybe even Sununu will be favored. We'll have to see. Georgia, one of the new senators just elected this year, Raphael Warnock, will be back on the ballot. He only got a 2-year term, and this will be for a full 6-year term, and that will be highly competitive, as we know. Anyway, that's the essence of it. You don't see that much competition, and that is also a function of our polarization. Now, it's possible that a deep red state will become competitive and a deep blue state will become competitive for reasons we can only guess at right now. We don't know who the opponents will be in most of the states. The primaries haven't been held. But that gives you an idea of what's up, and it suggests to us that at least preliminarily, the Senate will be competitive. If Democrats are going to hang on to one of the two houses, it will be the Senate, not the House. And things will have to go well for them in the handful of states where there are truly competitive contests for them to hang on even to the Senate. And it could easily be 50-50 again, or 51-49 for them. It's hard to see it going higher than that for the Democrats. It's also easy to see Republicans gaining some sort of majority. They have to get 51 seats, obviously, since the vice president, a Democrat, breaks the ties in the Senate, as she does right now. The only toss-up we have in there is Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania is so highly competitive, and the incumbent Pat Toomey, Republican incumbent, is retiring after 2 terms, and that will be highly competitive. And it could easily decide the Senate. As you look at the races now, it's easy to see how it will end up 50-49, and the Pennsylvania seat will decide which side has a majority, or 50-50 at least. Okay, so that's Senate. Governor projections, because this is a big year coming up for governors, as it always is. We used to have a lot of governors races in presidential years, not anymore. States have removed their gubernatorial contests from the presidential year to eliminate the coattail factor. Although, ironically, there is still a coattail factor. It's called presidential approval or disapproval. So, and party in a partisan age. So I don't know that their attempts have really accomplished very much. But there are 20 Republican seats up. Sometimes the incumbent's running, sometimes he or she's term limited out of the seat, sometimes the governor just wants to retire. So there are 20 Republican seats and there are 18 Democratic seats, with a lot of governors running for another term. And you can see the division here. It's always amazing how the map divides up into mainly the northern corridor, Virginia being the southernmost, quote, northern state, meaning blue state, stretching all the way to California. And most of the red states are in the south or in the Rocky Mountain Midwest area that are traditionally Republican or have become Republican again, like Iowa and Ohio. So, you know, that, and some of the states there, it depends on whether the incumbent Republican runs again, like Massachusetts. Charlie Baker is a very liberal Republican, and he's been elected twice, and we don't know whether he's running for a 3rd term. If he's not running, probably the Democrat would have the edge. Again, we don't know which Democrat it will be. And New Hampshire and Vermont also have Republican governors, but Vermont's Republican governor is quite liberal, as is Maryland's governor, who's term limited out, Larry Hogan, who's now apparently going to run for president, or so he says. You never know what they're really going to do until they file. Kyle is going to talk a little bit about the House when we get to him, but I think it's fair to say in a summary statement from me that with this tiny Democratic majority, and the Democrats had expected, and frankly, a lot of Republicans privately had expected the Democrats to gain seats in 2020. They lost seats. They lost quite a few. And so now they barely have a majority. There are a few open seats that will be filled, most of them safe Democratic seats, but just a tiny margin. And you look at the effects of redistricting, you look at the gerrymandering that's occurring in both red and blue states where they don't have nonpartisan commissions, although in some of the nonpartisan commission states, there will also be gerrymandering, as it's turning out. You put all that together, and you can see that the Republicans could easily gain the number of seats they need, and then some, just from the new seats that some red states are gaining from reapportionment after the census, and the redistricting / gerrymandering that's occurring throughout the country, at least the projections of it. And by the way, the crystal ball has every state projected that has more than one representative on redistricting. And that's another feature you'll find when you go to centerforpolitics.org/crystal ball. They say you have to repeat things 3 times for people to remember it. And so I've done my job for centerforpolitics.org/crystal ball. That was an extra. So there's the governorship races, and they're very important. We put way too much emphasis on the other races because so much of our lives are determined by what a governor and state legislature are able to do together, what laws they pass and the governor signs. Now, this is the current governor projections, mainly for 2020, although we have New Jersey and Virginia, the 2 states that are up now. I would say in Virginia, the blue there is very, very light. There's a tiny edge to Terry McAuliffe, the Democratic nominee, simply because Virginia has turned so Democratic. But there are a lot of headwinds for McAuliffe, mainly, frankly, not being in the state of Virginia, but rather in DC. The fact that Biden's ratings have been dropping, even in a state like Virginia that elected him, gave him Virginia's electoral votes in a landslide. Donald Trump has never been popular here. Hillary Clinton carried Virginia, the only southern state she carried. And in the 2020 election, it was a landslide for Biden, over 10 percentage points. So this is not a pro-Trump state, to say the least. But because Biden's ratings have been dropping, it's more difficult for McAuliffe to motivate the Democrats to get out and vote. And that's why he's hoping, and Democrats are hoping, that Biden and the Democrats in Congress can manage to come to some compromise. It's never easy to reach a compromise, but most of us have to do it daily. And it always is amazing when people of basically the same stripe disagree so violently they can't come together on something like this. But maybe they will in the end. Maybe they will. Can't tell you. I just left Joe Manchin on TV talking about what he'll accept. And he says 1.5 trillion, and they think maybe that'll go up a little bit. Of course, the progressives and liberals in the House and Senate on the Democratic side want 3.5 trillion. So there's an awful lot of distance between 1.5 trillion and 3.5 trillion. I have no idea where it will end up or if it will even end up anywhere. And the same for the infrastructure bill. That's already been passed by the Senate. Clearly, a majority of the House voting separately on that issue would vote for it. But it doesn't work that way. And you know what's happening. The progressives are linking the two bills together. It's just a giant mess, which often describes the operation of Congress anyway, whoever's in charge. All right, so those are the projections. You can see the toss-up states are Georgia, where Donald Trump recently in Georgia said that he would be perfectly okay if Stacey Abrams, the liberal Democratic probable nominee, defeated Brian Kemp, the Republican incumbent governor of Georgia, because he's still mad at Kemp for not, fixing the election for Trump in 2020. Incredible what goes on in this country anymore. Pennsylvania will be close. It always is. It is going to be for Senate as well. Wisconsin, the incumbent Democrat has a slight edge, but I'd say that's a very close one. Kansas has a Democratic governor because of a split on the Republican side 3 years ago. And who knows whether that will continue. She'll need a break. Laura Kelly will need a break to get reelected. And Arizona, the Republican incumbent, two-term incumbent, is retiring. And we don't even know who the nominees will be. It's impossible to guess, but it's another highly competitive state. And we can talk about any of these that you want to when we get to the question period. Okay, let's go to the next slide, if we can. And the next slide is just our first stab. We can't even, if we listed all the people who might run for president on both sides, we'd have 6 slides for the Democrats and another 6 for the Republicans, because nobody knows or could know whether Joe Biden really will run for re-election. Does he want to? Consider it this way. He has spent his entire adult lifetime running for president. He had 2 unsuccessful presidential campaigns, plus 8 years as vice president, before he actually won at the age of 77. He turned 78 shortly thereafter. He's turning 79 in November, this November. So if he can possibly run, that is, if his health holds up and if he has a record that he believes is sufficient to get him reelected, you can be very, very sure he's going to run for election, even though he would be 82 a month after the 2024 election. And if he served the entire term, would be 86. So that's unprecedented, but we wish everybody good health. That includes Donald Trump, who is 74, I believe, now, and therefore would be close to 78 when the election of 2024 comes up. And he has given every indication that he's running again. All the people around him say he is running again, but we all know how mercurial he is. So I don't think anybody is going to put a whole lot of money on anything he says about running, but I think he'd like to, because frankly, revenge is one of the motivations for him to get up every morning. I've known a fair number of politicians who fit that bill, but more so probably Trump than anybody else. Back on the Democratic side, if Biden doesn't run, Obviously, Vice President Harris will run. She may be at least a slight favorite. I don't know, depends on who else runs, but by no means does she automatically get the nomination unless she has succeeded to the presidency for some reason or another. And a lot of the people who ran in 2020 will be running again. You know, Pete Buttigieg, who's transportation secretary, and Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey. And again, I'm not going through them all. You can name them. And then there are a lot of people you can't name who will end up running. And on the Republican side, again, it depends on whether Trump runs. Trump will chase out of the race most of the alternative candidates because the Republican Party right now, we don't know what it'll be in 2024, but right now it's the Trump party as much as it's the Republican Party. And a very sizable majority say they want Trump to run again of Republicans. They want Trump to run again and they will vote to renominate him. So he would be the most likely winner if indeed he runs. If he runs, he's going to have some opponents. So Chris Christie has all but announced, the former governor of New Jersey, where he thinks he's getting the votes from to get the nomination for president. I don't know, but I'm sure he has a good rationale that he'll share with us many times between now and 2024. You know, others, who else will run, even if Trump runs? I can't tell you. None of them are going to come out and say it because they don't want to alienate Trump. Because if Trump doesn't run, they will want his endorsement, and he will endorse probably somebody to be his replacement candidate on the Republican ballot. So they're trying to be careful. Ron DeSantis is obviously planning to run and has all kinds of people working on his behalf. But just yesterday, he said he had absolutely no interest whatsoever. He's only focusing on re-election in Florida in 2022. And if you believe that, I've got a rotunda to sell you. Nikki Haley, you know, she's interested. I don't think she'll run against Trump. The interesting one is Mike Pence, because you remember Trump was big on Pence, more or less, until January 6th. And as the new Woodward and Costa book, Peril, suggests, Trump said to Pence, you either vote with me, that is, keep the electoral votes from being counted in key states so that Trump could be installed for a second term, which is, you know, kind of questionable. I hope 100% of you agree with that. If you don't, we got problems come the question period. But he said to Pence, when Pence said he couldn't do that constitutionally, and he checked with Dan Quayle, former vice president from Indiana, who told him, not a chance, you can get away with that. That's when Trump said to Pence, Mike, you won't be my friend anymore. So they're not friends. But, you know, again, Trump's mercurial. Who the heck knows what he'll do and say about Pence between now and then. So we can talk more about that if you're interested. I think actually, believe it or not, yeah, I've kept it to what I said I was going to keep it to. That was an accident. I almost never do that. But I want to bring in at this moment my good friend and managing editor of the Crystal Ball, Kyle Kondik, and he's going to help with both the Q&A portion and also some of the other subjects I mentioned. Kyle does a terrific job for us. He's just first rate, one of the best analysts around, and he's going to be releasing his second book in October, this next month, which begins tomorrow, amazingly. And his second book is called The Long Red Thread: How Democratic Dominance Gave Way to Republican Advantage in U.S. House Elections. His first book was The Bellwether, about Ohio. And I've read both of them, and I highly recommend them to you. I like to tell him that he really should be pushing the books that we co-edit together every 2 years on the midterm and general election. The most recent one being, and wouldn't you know it, I just happen to have a copy here, A Return to Normalcy, the 2020 election that almost broke America. And I am so grateful that we included that question mark, because if this is normalcy, I don't know that I'm all that much in favor of it anymore, but compared to the Trump term, I guess it is somewhat normal, somewhat more normal. So anyway, you want to take a look at that book, and it'll be advertised on the centerforpolitics.org site, and covers gerrymandering and what's happened to the House over the past several decades, and a lot of what's going to be in the news this fall. So you can catch up with it by reading the book. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kyle, and he has a special guest who is making a cameo and his first appearance electronically. This will dog him for the rest of his life, 11-year-old Albie. And we love Albie, and we look forward to the photos his mother sends out every morning, or little video clips of what Albie is doing. And do I see, Kyle, that Albie is in any UVA outfit? Is that true?
He is indeed. It's all scrunched up, but you can see it right here. And we got this when we got to visit Uncle Larry last month. We had a nice visit at the pavilion, and I think Larry and Albie are going to be good friends, or are good friends.
We are already. He has babbled to me several times, and he's made more sense than most people in politics. I understood what he was saying and why, but he's a great kid and is going to take after mom and dad, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
So Albie, thank you for doing this. And remember, you can't get in trouble for what you don't say. And that was perfect. That was perfect, Albie. You can't get in trouble for anything that you said because you didn't say anything. You just looked great. You look marvelous, as the line used to be from Saturday Night Live decades ago. Thank you, Albie.
Good work, pal.
Yeah. And thank you, Lottie, for helping.
Welcome.
Well, hey, good to be here with you, Larry, and everybody else. And book for me, The Long Red Thread. It'll be out in a couple of weeks about U.S. House elections and gerrymandering. It's basically history of the House since the early 1960s. So look for that. If you're interested in the crystal ball, Larry mentioned the website, centerforpolitics.org/crystal ball. You can also sign up for our email updates. We've generally sent it out 2 issues a week. We've sort of expanded our publication schedule recently. And also, we've got an interesting new documentary coming out from the Center for Politics called 5 Years North. It's about the immigration issue as told through a young undocumented boy living in New York, and also an ICE agent who is patrolling his neighborhood. We're actually going to have a premiere of that tomorrow night at 6:30 in Charlottesville. Also, it's going to be free to stream, and the information for that is on the Center for Politics.org website. So that's also something to look for. And that's going to be a national PBS documentary. So you'll also be able to find it locally across a lot of the country starting next week. So with that, Larry, let's get to the first question we have here. This is from Marty Mond. And he asks, whatever the outcome of the 2022 election, will it provide any guidance for predicting the 2024 election? And if so, what will be that guidance?
I'm glad to hear from you, Marty. Marty is up in Delaware, and he has had several sons. He went to UVA, and he's had several sons. 2 of them, I think, through commerce school, and one of them not commerce. I think it was the college. In fact, I taught him, I believe. And so he's UVA through and through, and I want to salute him because he's had a very, very tough health challenge, and he is beating it. He gave me a good report just today. And we want to see that continue, Marty, and we congratulate you and wish you wahoo wah. And that means anything. So you certainly means good health and happiness. Marty, in a lot of cases, the midterms do tell you something about the forthcoming presidential election. And I could name, 10, 15, but let's take 2006 when Democrats took over from the Republicans, both the House and the Senate, in the middle of George W. Bush's second term. Sure enough, it predicted the Democratic wave in 2008 when Barack Obama was elected president. The Democrats won a large majority in the Senate and kept the House and added to their House total. So there's a case where it happened. But and I suppose you could say 2018, because 2018 Democrats did reasonably well in that midterm, not as well as they had hoped to, but they did reasonably well. And in a sense, it presaged Biden's defeat of Trump in 2020. But there are loads of cases where it really doesn't predict anything. Take Obama again. In 2010, in the middle of Obama's first term, the Republicans had an enormous wave in the midterm elections of 2010. Obviously, it didn't mean a thing for 2012 when Obama won his second term. So these things, every election cycle's different. Every election's different. so much can change in a year and any more in a week, but you got 2 years between the midterm and the presidential, you just can't say. It would be foolish to suggest that there's a direct relationship. Sometimes when a party wins a big majority, a really big majority in a midterm, they go so far to some extreme that they turn off the handful of swing voters and independents, and they end up losing the next presidential election because people want to make sure there's a check on them. So we'll just have to wait and see whether Republicans do as well as they think they're going to do, and as some Democrats fear they will do, particularly in the House of Representatives, and whether they go too far, which may help Biden or another Democrat win in 2024. Who the heck knows? That's going to be my answer to a lot of your questions. Who the heck knows? I cleaned it up. Off camera, I use another word, but who the heck knows?
Next question, David Roseman, class of 1975. Kind of a bummer of a question, frankly. Have things always been this bad and I just don't remember, or are things extra bad these days?
Well, of course, it depends on your perspective, but I'd have to say, at least for my lifetime, this is awful. And it's awful because our compact as Americans has really, if not fallen apart, it's come pretty close. And we did have our first insurrection / coup d'etat attempt since the Civil War. That's really a bad sign. And there are a lot of other bad signs, lots of other. And you will see it in that report we released this morning. I was stunned by some of the results. I knew it was going to be bad. I didn't think it was going to be this bad. And it's a very well done study. It took months to do. It's not one of these quickie polls that you can't trust. So take a look at it and you'll see. You tell me after you read that whether it's bad, very bad, or extremely bad. And my suggestion to you would be between very bad and extremely bad. Maybe it also has to do with age. You and I are about the same age. Yes, I'm a year or whatever older than you are. And I think, sometimes the pessimism builds up. So maybe that's why we are looking at it the way we are looking at it, or maybe not. Who the heck knows?
We had a number of questions, of course, about the upcoming Virginia gubernatorial race, which is kind of one of the first big races that happens after a presidential election. So Thomas Ruff, Charles Diedrich, Julia Gull, Tracy Ducia, Kristen Cabral, Priscilla Masters, all that sort of variations of similar questions. But let me frame it this way. This is Thomas Ruff's question. The Virginia Democrats have the same enthusiasm as California Democrats just exhibited in the 2021 recall election of Gavin Newsom that Newsom won pretty convincingly a few weeks ago. Does this indicate that polls may be underestimating negative sentiment toward former President Trump that will ultimately push the Virginia governor election beyond the current polling, which is about a McAuliffe lead of 3 to 5 points?
Okay, first of all, of course, California is deeply blue. Virginia is bluer than it has been for a long time. The last time it was this blue, it wasn't the Democratic Party we think of today. It was Southern Democratic bird blue. But it is bluish, and it's become a little more blue with each year. And we all know the Republicans have lost every single election for a decade. And we have elections in Virginia every year. You have plenty of opportunities to come back, and they haven't. But we don't have the deep well of blue Democratic voters that California does, not even close. So that alone would make this, I think, a closer race. Now, Biden's landslide, I think that was exaggerated for Democrats because the antipathy toward Trump in this state, in the places where there are lots and lots of votes, Northern Virginia, the Richmond area, Tidewater, some other places, university towns like Charlottesville, and there are a lot of university communities in Virginia. You put all those together, and the antipathy toward Trump expanded the Democratic margin. I don't by any means believe the normal competitive margin in Virginia between Democrats and Republicans is 10 points. I think it's more like what the polling averages show McAuliffe has right now, 3 or 4 or 5 points, something like that. And then that sometimes is registered voters, not likely voters. And that gets to the question of enthusiasm. Now, I want to salute you for bringing up California for another reason, because Newsom was also in trouble in the polls for a good bit of that recall campaign. Why? Democrats hadn't been activated. They weren't enthused. They hadn't planned to vote in a September election. Who has September elections for governor? And the recall process is crazy, but don't get me off on that. So I think there's a similarity there in that in this year without Trump, although Trump is in the news every day, I had so many Republicans tell me as he was leaving office in January, and these are leaders, you watch, he'll be old news in 2 months. You know, he'll do things we'll never hear from him. He won't make any difference. How wrong they all were. Every one of them was wrong. The ones that I talked to, because Trump does not want to leave center stage, and he will stay there as long as he possibly can. And he stays there because he has such a large base. Democrats would say cult. And it's very difficult to move somebody off the stage when you have millions and millions of people hanging on this person's every word and believing them over the facts, the obvious, clear facts, like the election was safe and fair, which it was. And they believe Trump, who makes up new stories every day about corrupt elections and rigged elections. It's disgusting. But we have to live with it. We have to try and change it, but we have to live with it. So the question is, can Democrats get excited toward the end like the Democrats did in California? I have to say, if the Democrats fall flat in DC, I doubt they do. But this is really critical for McAuliffe more than anybody else, because Governor Phil Murphy in New Jersey is all but safe. That election is going to be substantially Democratic. But this one is close enough so that it could switch, the governorship could switch. So I suspect that Terry McAuliffe is hoping, maybe against hope, that Democrats will get it together. He has said as much publicly, and I'm sure privately has been communicating that to the appropriate individuals as well. I don't want to take too long on each question because I want to get to a lot of them.
Question from William Horton, class of 1977. He asked, what can realistically be done to decrease the gerrymandering that is becoming so embedded in our state and federal processes? Also, Larry, you mentioned before you wanted a little bit on the House, just in general. And
Kyle,
I think
you take this gerrymandering question.
Okay.
That is about your new book. And what's the name of that book, Kyle?
The Long Red Thread. There you go.
That's what it is, the long red thread. Go ahead.
So I think Larry kind of summed it up pretty well on House, in that the size of the Democrats' advantage is so small. They only won 222 seats last time. You need 218 for the majority. So Republicans just need to win 5 more than they won in 2020. Just to put in some historical perspective, if you look at all the midterms since the end of World War II, the average seat loss for the president's party in midterms is 27. So that's 5 times the number of seats just on average that the Republicans need to flip. And so just that fact alone, I think, is really makes this favorable for Republicans. And I do think also that in the redistricting process, Republicans probably should still get something of an advantage out of that. I guess you could say maybe it's not going as terribly for Democrats so far, but we know so little about what the eventual enacted maps are going to be that I think it's hard to say. So, I think it'd be historically pretty surprising if Democrats held on the House. But on the other hand, we were in a similar position about 20 years ago. The Republicans had a very small, similarly sized majority, and they ended up netting seats in George W. Bush's first midterm. Now it's a lot different. Bush was really popular. You had 9/11, you had the Iraq War, you had redistricting in the Republicans' advantage. So, they had some advantages that Democrats won't this time, but it can be done. I mean, I think it'd be foolish to kind of rule out a Democratic House in 2023. But it's just very tricky. And as for the gerrymandering question, there are reform efforts, and in some states like Virginia, there have been commissions enacted that are supposed to be, less partisan than if, in the case of Virginia, Democrats could just draw the lines themselves, because if this reform had happened, that's the power that they would have. But there's always going to be grumbling about redistricting. I think there's been a lot of the Virginia process has been really pretty rocky so far, it seems like. And even if you have a so-called fair independent process, someone's going to feel like the winner and someone's going to feel like the loser. I do think that maybe there could be some sort of national solution in which maybe you could put some kind of guardrails on the process, that there are certain metrics of partisan fairness that if you could say that if one side sort of exceeds that, then those maps have to be reined in. Maybe that would be the right way to do it, because this is cyclical. Democrats used to have big advantages in redistricting in the 70s and 80s. Republicans do now. But who knows what it'll look like by the time 2030 comes along. Maybe there'd be some desire to get some sort of deal done, although that doesn't seem particularly likely. Larry, do you want to add anything about that?
Well, I would say this, the reforms often don't work. They look good on paper, but once you go through the process, you find out that politics manages to infuse even supposedly nonpartisan or bipartisan methods of redistricting. In fact, Virginia is seeing that right now. Maybe it'll change, but I'll be surprised if it does. So it's tougher. I happen to favor retired judges selected by their peers as the redistrictors, because they have nothing to lose, nothing to gain one way or the other, and they would be elected, one hopes, by their peers because of their reputations for great fairness, regardless of which president nominated them. I think that's the best of the alternatives. I'm not sure any of them work terribly well, or as well as their proponents tell us they will in advance. All right, let's go to the next question now. Good job.
It's from Andrew Wolf, class of 73. Please discuss the possible impacts of Supreme Court decisions concerning Roe v. Wade and the abortion issue on the 2022 midterms.
Well, if the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, which could happen, we all saw what they did with the Texas case, or Texas request by some. Given that, if they do overturn Roe v. Wade, of course it will be a major issue. In fact, the Texas law itself, I think, guarantees that abortion will be a major issue in 2022, because it is, I'm sorry, so extreme. There was a poll out in Texas yesterday, good pollster, Quinnipiac University, had 8 out of 10 Texans supporting the opportunity for abortion in cases of rape and incest. And of course, that bill prohibits it. And it has a strange system of Texans blowing the whistle on other Texans and spying on other Texans and accusing other Texans and getting rewarded for doing it. Wow. I mean, it's Big Brother visiting and really staying, I think, building a big house in Texas. So that alone, and it's going to be adopted in one form or another by a lot of other states that have Republican governors and Republican legislatures, because their primary is composed of various interest groups, one of them pro-life groups, and they're a big part of the voting majority in Republican primaries. So you better believe it's going to be an issue, and all hell will break loose. And I think it's appropriate to say, Katie, bar the door if Roe v. Wade is overturned.
Next questions are, let's go back to the influence of the former president, Donald Trump, on this race. We have 2 questions I'm going to lump together. First one is Chudy Obi, class 2015. Has the name Donald Trump become less of an effective campaign tool for the Democrats? And then sort of the opposite view on this, Patrick O'Malley, class of 1990. Given the favorability of the 2022 map and historic trends, what will it take for Trump to screw this up for the Republicans?
Chudy, nice to hear from you. I hope you're doing well. Look, Trump not being in office is certainly a part of the reduction in the effect of Trump's activities. That he's not having the massive effect he had while he was in office. I would say co-equal to his being out of the White House is his being off Twitter, because it is more difficult to find out what he's saying unless you're on the email list and get his statements that are longer tweets about almost anything on any given day. But it just doesn't have the same impact. He had millions and millions and millions of Twitter followers. And of course, the press covered almost every tweet that was in any way controversial. And that meant most of Trump's tweets. So in that sense, he has somewhat less impact. But on any given day, if he has a rally, he can have a major impact, or if he endorses a candidate. And people say, oh, that doesn't matter. Oh, yes, it does. To Republicans and Republican primaries, you better believe it matters. And that leads to the second question about how Trump could screw it up. Hey, I'll take this from Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell knows that when Donald Trump endorses a candidate in a crowded primary field, it automatically polarizes the candidates within that primary. And it makes it more difficult for the candidates to reunite, whether Trump's candidate wins or not. And I know that many senior Republicans believe that some of the candidates Trump has been picking are not the strongest candidates to win Senate seats, House seats, governorships. So, Trump, I know this is going to shock you, but Trump picks candidates who serve his own self-interest. That's a headline, right? You never would have guessed that on your own. He's not interested in the party's welfare. He's interested in Donald Trump's welfare. So, to the extent that he continues doing this, and he's endorsing all over the place, you don't hear about all of them, but within a state where he's endorsing a candidate, it's front page news for several days, and it will continue to be news through paid advertising. Okay, let's go on to the next question.
This is from Rick Trotta, class of 63. How would you grade the press in reporting the facts on President Biden in relation to Mr. Jefferson's comments on the role of the press in safeguarding our democracy?
Well, I suppose you could say they were so relieved that Trump was gone, as I think most Americans were, that they were perhaps softer on Biden the first few months he was in office. Maybe that's reflected in the ratings. But I don't know how anybody could say they're soft on him now. They were just over the top. As badly as the withdrawal was in Afghanistan, they were over the top, partly because the ones reporting were there or are there, and they have a lot of friends there who maybe were left behind, Afghanis and so on. There was a personal connection that they had. You could maybe even call it a little conflict of interest. That's up to you if you want to call it that. But they were hypercritical, and they couldn't see the forest for the trees. Yes, the withdrawal deserved loads of criticism. Nobody's going to say that went well. Nobody's going to say it couldn't have been planned better, even though nobody thought the American trained Afghan army would dissolve overnight the way it did, or that the president would flee with, I guess, a helicopter full of American money to some other place. I don't think they even know exactly where he is right now. So nobody predicted that. But when you're president, you have to deal with the 2020 hindsight committee, and the press are all in that. But they missed the big picture, which was we're finally out of this failed war. 20 years of war, and nobody's going to bring back the 2,400 plus Americans who were killed, or the $2 trillion approximately that we spent, which would pay for a good deal of what we're seeing Congress debate right now, if they still had it, hadn't spent it. So they're being very, very critical of Biden. And look at the last month. Everything he does, they put a negative spin on it. Even when his ratings fall on, say, COVID by a few points, they open with President Biden's ratings have fallen again. And you look at the numbers, and he still has majority support on that. So, you can play this game constantly. The press should do this, the press should do that. And something I've learned over this 50-year career is that the press is going to do what the press damn well pleases. And it doesn't matter what you think and what you say. That's the truth.
Question that was just submitted from Sutton D. Does Trump's endorsement of Glenn Youngkin, the Republican gubernatorial candidate in Virginia, does that serve Trump's self-interest? And if so, how?
Well, of course, Trump has been saying publicly in Virginia that the election was stolen here. Well, I happen to know this state very, very well. I know the votes, and I know the precincts. I know all of that. And this was an extremely safe and secure election in 2020. So it's just another part of Trump's gigantic big lie. We call it the big lie. But I don't know that he even acknowledges that he didn't win. There was a joke column from The Onion the other day saying Trump claims win in German elections. And there were a lot of people who thought it was a real headline because it's so credible, given Trump's record. I would say this: Trump is Trump is not helping Youngkin. That's certainly true. And Youngkin didn't help himself by saying what now seems to me to be very foolish things like, I'm in this race because I believe in so much of what President Trump believes. And he's been endorsed by Trump 4 times. And at least the first time he said how grateful he was to get the endorsement. Well, all these things are on videotape or they're digitally preserved and they're going to be used again and have been used again and will continue to be used again all the way to November 2nd. So no, Trump is not a plus for Youngkin. And he's continued to equivocate about whether he would have voted to certify the election. He finally said, yeah, he would. You mean after all these months, he didn't know instantly that he would have certified the election because it was a safe and secure election, as said by the Trump head of CISA, who's a UVA graduate, was one of my students, and is a conservative Republican, and was in the Trump administration, and was fired by Trump on Twitter because he had the gall to say the truth, which was that it was a safe and secure election. So any association with Donald Trump may help Youngkin with the Trump base, but I think we mentioned Trump lost Virginia by 10 points. That's not nearly enough to win.
We have time for, I think, just one more question. This is from Alice Taylor. And she says, do you recommend a strategy for voting, as in have a plan and stick to it, either in person or a Dropbox? And she also adds, would there be more confidence in the results if as many Dems as possible were to vote in person?
Do you seriously think that Donald Trump and people like him would be impressed if more Democrats voted in person? They just claimed they were manufacturing ballots at the polling places. No, people should vote the way that is most convenient to them, particularly in pandemic times, the way they feel most secure and safe. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with mail voting. I've done it for years and years. If there's a problem with it, it's the post office. I'll bet a lot of you can identify with this. I have a great week if I get mail 3 days a week. Most weeks I get mail once or twice a week. I'm still waiting for my mail ballot, which I ordered ages ago. Still haven't gotten it. And it started September, whatever it was, 17th. Still waiting for the mail ballot. I can only imagine how many other people have had their ballots lost or are still waiting for a mail ballot that may or may not ever show up. I don't get most of the mail mailed to me. I find out because people email me and say, how come you haven't answered that? Why haven't you paid this bill? I've got a good excuse, but still, I bet a lot of you are having the same problem. So the post office has to be fixed. And I'm not going to get into the particulars of that. And I think where are we? We're 1:59. We're supposed to end at 2. I just want to say to all of you that I appreciated your tuning in. It may be an inconvenient hour in the middle of the day, but I appreciate your doing so. It was good to hear from you. I wish I was seeing you, and eventually we will. So I could end with a lot of things, but we should end not with the good old song, because I can't sing. I can't carry a tune. I've never been able to carry a tune. I'm simply going to say wahoo wah. And you know what that means. It means all the best to you and your families and your friends in every respect. And we'll see you soon, I hope.
Larry, thank you so much. Kyle, thank you so much, both from the Center for Politics, for your time today, the insights, the words of wisdom, and the way to say that, yes, vote however you can in a way that is safe and secure for yourself. For those who joined us, you can once again join Larry Sabato on October 23rd for our More Than the Score event with the Office of Engagement's Lifetime Learning Program. The October 23rd event will be held in person at Charlottesville at 10 a.m. It will also be streamed live. You will find details about this event, as well as information on Kyle's book and details on the Center for Politics in an email from the UVA Clubs later this week. Again, thank you for joining us, and I'll echo Larry's wahoo wah.